Hi guys, I had an idea. I thought I would read a chapter or two out of Giver's Newsboys for Dad, and everybody can do this if we want. It'd just be maybe something fun for all of us to hear, but why not showcase Dad's writing, right? And have a good time together. So I'm going to start with chapter 1 of Giver's News and the Great Break-In. Okay. After a typical day of work, suffering a variety of humbling and degrading experiences, I was finally driving home and telling little bride all the profound and brilliant responses that I should have used, but didn't. She patiently patted my knee and nodded in sympathy. I was in need of something to help me simmer down and work off some of the frustration I had accumulated during the day. I wanted to be in an acceptable mood to greet my wonder dog, Rucky, with a head pat rather than a resounding head thump, as he placed his paw prints on the front of my shirt, as he'd done every afternoon for the past several years. Little Bride was scheduled to assist in the nursing home in town that afternoon, so I opted to walk the final half mile down a gravel road to get exercise and work off some of my anguish and frustration. In spite of being a brisk Minnesota February afternoon, this seemed like a great idea at the time, as it saved her some time and I'd have a few minutes to compose myself. After giving her a peck on the cheek and a wave, I felt my pockets for my house keys as I watched my beloved Nissan cresting a nearby hill. Having emptied all of my pockets the day before to send my jacket to the cleaners, I found there were no keys or anything else in them. My pockets were totally empty. My mind was swirling as I trudged the half mile home. Questions that came to mind were, do we still have a hidden key? Are there any windows unlocked? Could I break into my own home? Or was I doomed to sit on the porch steps until little bride returned in several hours? I quickly ruled out the hidden key, as we'd had it on the windowsill under a toy truck for decades. But a few months back, I thought that the crime rate in Otter Tail may warrant change in our security system, and I had removed it. Unlocked windows were not possible, as I had saved pennies for years and put on combinations and had that job pretty well completed on all the accessible windows. The kitchen windows did not have combinations on them, but they were usually impossible to open even from the inside, and that was with the use of tools and a crowbar. I had attempted that feat every spring for decades with varying amount of success. The basement door was not only locked, but I had fashioned a 2x4 to slide across it to prevent it from popping open when I threw wood in the basement hall. A brisk February wind was beginning to cool my now glistening furrowed brow. I then remembered, hey, the tiny window that enters our sauna room in the basement. Having married into the Finnish community and having purchased the little bride's family home, we do have a genuine Finnish sauna, complete with a set of benches and nearly airproof insulation. The window to the sauna, however, is under our sun porch or deck, and the deck has only about 18 inches of room under it. As I arrived in our yard, Rucky did exactly as I knew he would. He greeted me by jumping up and placing his paws on my chest. Wiping Rucky's paw prints from the front of my jacket, I gave him a perfunctory pat on the head and found a little piece of rug on the railing of the deck. I placed it on the ground as far as I could reach under the deck and proceeded to attempt to crawl under the deck and remain on the rug. It soon wadded up and gave me even less room to navigate. My head and shoulders went under in good order, but I soon realized that there were portions of my anatomy that were thicker than the allowed 18 inches. As there were spaces between the 2x10 flooring boards, I managed to slide a few inches at a time. Of course, I wasn't alone. Rucky, my half-witted Dalmatian, was accompanying me every inch of the way. There he is. He was, for the most part, within 2 inches of my face. Much to my disgust, he wasn't always facing me. I shall refrain from commenting upon his gastric distress at this time. Oh my goodness. Since my elbows Since my elbows were mashed into the soil beneath me, the only defense I had was to attempt to butt him out of the way with my head. However, being wedged under the deck, my butting attempts were quite feeble, and he appeared to enjoy the sport, and his enthusiasm for the sport increased dramatically. Having my head at a lower level than his delighted him immensely, and he was obviously overjoyed to think that I had sunk to a level so that he actually towered over me. This put him in the mood to play. Lick the master's face until he gags was the first game that he invented under the deck. My screams and feeble headbutts did little to change his delight in the new game. While digging at the wooden frame on the screen covering and window with the fingernails of my left hand, I eventually freed my right hand enough to grab one of his lips, and this puzzled him momentarily. That's what we're looking at. A tiny light seemed to flick on in his minuscule Dalmatian brain as it became obvious to him that I really wanted to play rough now, and he accommodated me by apparently losing all remnants of control. Rough Play is his middle name. The space under the deck had been his domain for years, and he could spin, roll, bounce, and dart around me, nipping and slurping at his leisure. During those rare moments that he was nipping and chewing on portions of my anatomy other than my face and hands, I would rip and tear at the screen that stood between me and the window, which I really, really hoped wasn't locked. To remove the screen, I had to penetrate the cave of the deck even more, and Ruck became more ecstatic with the marvelous game that we were engaged in. His enthusiasm had increased to the point he was barking, whining, and bouncing up and down with delight. Unbending the rusty nails which had held the screen in place wasn't an easy chore either, as my tools were safely locked out of reach in my garage. Even if they had been more readily available, I wasn't about to leave the crawl space that I had battled so desperately to enter. My fingers became my claw hammer and screwdriver, but with a demented dog now wanting to occupy the few inches between the window and me, this task became considerably more complicated. I'm not sure if it was exhaustion or the realization that my yells and screams seemed to encourage the insane animal, but I quit making the sounds that I had hoped would cause him to cease his demonic activity. Perhaps it was the strange tasting debris that was flying into my face and mouth that made me shut up and concentrate on the job at hand. My chirps, squeaks, and squeals only egged him on to greater exuberance. His joy knew no bounds. With the soft snapping of rotted wood being broken, the screen fell into my hands. Sorry. With the soft snapping of rotting wood. Sorry. I'm just remembering this. It's so funny. With the soft snapping of rotted wood being broken, the screen fell into my hands and the window to the sauna was now exposed. I'd expected the opening of the window to be as difficult as the entire prior portion of the day had been, but I was mildly amazed to have it pop open with only a mere nudge of my head. Actually, it may have been 30 or 40 nudges, but it did open to the totally dark sauna room. Having neglected to fix that lock, which had been broken for quite some time, now seemed to indicate some sort of wisdom on my part. As there was at least 5 foot drop, as there was at least a 5-foot drop to the sauna floor, proceeding head first seemed a poor idea, but it would at least protect me from the dog's idea of a marvelous time. He was now into a whirling mode and seemed determined to auger himself into the frozen earth under the floor of the deck. With my arms wrapped around my head, a 180-degree turn was accomplished. The thought occurred to me that if I was pressed while in 18 inches of space under the deck, the window is considerably smaller. I slowly slid backwards, feet first, toward the dark hole. The way... Oh, Dad. Oh, the window being hinged on top opened invitingly as my feet slid through the opening. I moved into the sauna slowly. Okay, I moved into the sauna slowly, waving my feet about while trying to purchase a grip to prevent a tumble into the darkness. Several bottles of shampoo thumped onto the floor as my feet waved above the benches. This encouraged me, as now I suspected there may be a bench nearby and I would be less likely to break my jaw or other highly prized portions of my anatomy on the lower window edge should I fall. However, falling wasn't likely, as the wider portions of my anatomy hadn't squeezed through the tiny hole yet. As I inched backwards, it became As I inched backwards, it became very obvious that there would need to be some... Sorry. Dad, you're so funny. Oh, as I inched backward, it became very obvious that there would need to be some serious adjustments in my girth before the mission could be deemed successful. As my waistline was being forced into the narrow window, I had to pull my arm and elbows under myself again to use more force to squeeze my stomach into the hole. Thoughts of corking a wine bottle fluttered about in my head. It also occurred to me. That it would be a horrible experience to still be wedged in the window when little bride came home. Oh, visions of burly firemen ripping out my deck boards. This is really hard to read. Oh, okay. Visions of burly firemen ripping out my deck boards to rescue me even bobbed into my consciousness momentarily. Rucky was delirious with joy throughout the entire ordeal. Oh. Okay, I'm trying to regain some composure. Okay. Concentrating on the grim possibilities wasn't a luxury that I could long enjoy, however. It was while my arms were cramped under my torso that Rucky decided that the game would be even more fun if he could examine the contents of my ears with his tongue. At this point, I broke my silence and began to tell him about the experiences that he'd soon be facing if I survived this ordeal. My threats did not deter him in the slightest. In fact, after examining my ears, he felt that a nosing and tonguing of my entire face was in order, and he proceeded to slurp and slobber every inch of exposed skin. For a few moments, I buried my face into the soil. For a few moments, I buried my face into the soil and thereby prevented him from drowning me in his saliva. This was only a momentary diversion, as he then placed his front feet on my head and drove my face further into the frozen but interesting tasting earth. He was truly the master at this point. Oh my goodness. I wasn't just hanging there for his entertainment. I was busily squeezing backwards and was soon nearly halfway through the opening. This final push required all of my concentration, and having Ruck's foot-long tongue lapping at my nostrils tended to sap me of some of my mental energy, but increased my determination and incentive. Oh my goodness, Dad, you are so funny. That's Ruck and his mile-long tongue. Oh, gosh, foot-long tongue. All right. He seemed to realize that I was perhaps slipping away from him. He renewed his attempts to get me to play and become even soggier. He ran in a frenzy back and forth under the deck boards with his tongue moving so fast as to be a blinding blur. With fluttering feet, I felt myself sliding into the dark basement. Being unable to grab anything with my arms, I made a wild kick to the left, and the toe of my tennis shoe purchased a wonderful grip on the edge of the sauna bench, and thereby prevented me from a possible broken jaw or worse. I then safely fell to the floor. I was in my home. As Rex's head came through the window to inspect the situation, I reached up and grabbed his ear, giving it a scratch and a pat on the snout. I said, "Thanks, amigo. Couldn't have done it without you." I hope you enjoyed it. We'll do chapter 2 later. Love you. Mwah.